episode of King Jing Things. I am King Jing, and joining me today is someone who lives and breathes cycling, a true expert when it comes to the world of road racing. He's got deep insight into the sport's toughest one-day event, and he's here to break down what's shaping up to be another beautiful yet brutal edition of the Paris-Roubaix. There's no better person to help us navigate the cobbles and the chaos than this man. It's Mike. We knew it was Mike. What's
Oh,
going on?
shocker. Oh, man. I thought it was somebody new this time. What a beautiful introduction. Thanks, Jing. Uh, I don't know why I love cycling so much, and I feel like most people don't, but couldn't be happier to be here to talk about it. It's my favorite topic to talk about, so hell yeah, Paris-Roubaix is going to be sick on Sunday.
I'm glad you brought this up because, when we started thinking about, starting to do videos and stuff, we had an idea where you deep dive into these sort of obscure sports that, I know nothing about. I've done a little bit of research. I've read the blogs that you've been putting out on your Substack. So I have like a little bit of background, but I thought this would be interesting, and, it might be able to reach a different sort of audience that we don't really get when we talk about wrestling.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's a big, you know, I think the hardest part about cycling is just being able to find it. It's becoming a lot more accessible here, but when I started watching it as a kid, like you had to find it on TV. You better hope it was on TV, and if it wasn't, you just weren't watching the races because it's not popular here in the US. And I read a lot of articles weekly about how to make it more popular here, and I unfortunately don't have that answer, but hopefully this is a good way to find some new fans and talk about something that I would argue is the hardest sport in the world.
All right, let's go ahead and dive right into it then. What exactly makes the Paris-Roubaix like so special compared to other races on the cycling calendar?
Yeah, so Paris-Roubaix is one of the five classics each year. These are the monuments, they call them, the five biggest races in cycling, the five biggest one-day races in cycling. So most people know the Tour de France. It's the second most watched sporting event each year, but they don't know how intricate the sport is. When I think about cycling as a whole, you know, I think about and I'll use an F1 comparison. So when you think about F1, you kind of have your top teams, your mid-tier teams, and then your teams that just aren't very good, unfortunately. And cycling, I think about you have your climbers, you have your sprinters, and then you have your classics riders. They all have different purposes that you're going to watch them in the Tour de France and they're not going to do what you want them to do specifically because they're not winning like your specific climbers or your 3-week connoisseurs. But these might be the guys that are winning arguably the biggest races of the year in these monuments. They are stronger, they are bigger, they aren't as light on the bike, but can generate more watts than anybody else. And Paris-Roubaix is truly one of a kind. It's raw. It's unpredictable. It's brutal in a way that no other race is. Going over cobblestones, sectors of mud and dust. It's always sheer chaos. It's 250 kilometers of just a chaos. They don't call it the hell of the North for nothing. Uh, and the way that I see it, riders don't just race it, they survive it. It's not the same as just riding a bike down the road. This is a war of attrition at the end of the day.
I've seen some of the clips from past races, and it certainly seems brutal. Whether it's people crashing or just like the point of view, they'll ride around with the cameras on them, and they're looking down, and their bikes are shaking the entire time. What exactly does the Paris-Roubaix course like challenge riders differently than some of these other classics and monuments?
So Paris-Roubaix specifically is known for its 55 kilometers of cobbled sectors. So this is basically just cobblestones that are in the ground that have been around for 120 plus years, probably way longer than that, but this is the 122nd edition of Paris-Roubaix, I'm pretty sure. And you know, it's not about just riding fast. Imagine riding a bike and just going like this over and over again and shaking and it hurting. Everything hurts, but you have to keep going because there's 29 other sectors after your first one. It's think about your bike. It often comes with luck. It's a mental game. Uh, if your tire goes down, you might lose the race and you might have been the best, you might have been the favorite. We just don't know what's going to happen. So I think about it as like the perfect blend of toughness, finesse, but also luck. And if you can put it all together, saying you won Paris-Roubaix goes for the rest of your life. It makes you a legend. It's like we talk about with the Masters. You win the Masters once, you're a legend of the sport forever. That's the same with Paris-Roubaix and the way that these guys do it.
You mentioned that a majority of the track or a lot of the track is across cobblestones. Are there any key sectors or points in the race that sort of, are deciding factors that can really help sway the outcome of the race?
There's three sectors that really stand out. So again, there's 30 sectors that go along 55 kilometers throughout the race. The first 2 hours of the race is pretty much flat, just road, and then it starts probably 100 kilometers in. So it's really getting the riders ramped up for the challenge that's ahead. Every sector is tiered from 1 star to 5 stars, 5 stars being the most difficult, right? So I think of the Trouet de Arenberg, the Monzen Povelli, I'm not pronouncing these correctly because I'm not French, and the Carrefour del Arb, which is actually about 17 kilometers from the finish, which, after 230 kilometers, you're really tired. It's really tough to do these. But these three specifically are 5 star sectors that are harder than any sector of cobblestone in any racial race throughout the year, and where most people often find themselves either having a puncture or falling and getting hurt. This is again, they call it the war of attrition because realistically, this is where most people get hurt. Uh, some people don't come back from a race like this if something was to happen. So these three sectors specifically, the Arenberg specifically, they've actually changed the route for the 2025 race. They changed it last year in a way that most people didn't find made sense. Now they've actually created 4 turns before going into this sector to slow the guys down because in years past it was absolute chaos, crashes everywhere, very scary.
Say you are one of these top contenders. What do you do if your tire pops? Do you have, like, obviously in NASCAR, something happens, you just pull over into the pit stop, and you have an entire team there sort of helping you out. I feel like when you're out there cycling, you're kind of on your own a little bit. Like, well, how do people recover from this?
Yeah, so when you think about cycling, it's such a team sport. We'll get into that a little bit more here, I know, but uh, your team car is following behind you with a new bike and or tire. Depending on what's faster, you always want to keep your main bike because that's the one that you have prepared for the race. You have your head unit on it that's telling you all your watts and everything that you need to know. Um, but there are times in the race when groups break up, right? And your car can't be there immediately. And if your car is right behind you, it might take 30 seconds and you might be able to get back with the group. But unfortunately, if your car is 5 or 6 groups behind because that's just the way a sector is went, you might lose a minute or two. And a minute or two in cycling is an eternity. You don't just come back to the top riders in moments like that. So it's your team better be prepared. They're always trying to be in the most ideal position for you. And in a race like this, you're going to have guys in specific sectors just waiting to change your tire too, which you wouldn't see in most races.
I'm sure, like you said, there's a little bit of a team dynamic there. I'm sure they might, have a preference on maybe who they want to win within the team. They might want one of their top guys, going ahead and crossing that finish line first. Uh, who are the top contenders heading into the Paris-Roubaix?
Yeah, so I'll start with kind of talking about how teams work within the race. So each team has about 7 riders, and realistically, only one person on the team is looked at as the person that they want to win the race. Now, a lot of times what's happening is there are so many tactics in cycling that are understood by somebody that doesn't watch this, which I totally understand. But realistically, the top teams that we're talking about, UAE Team Emirates, Team Visma Lease Bike, we're talking about Alpecin de Koenig. These are your 3 favorites going into Paris-Roubaix. They have guys that they're going to want to send up the road into a breakaway early in the race because they want to have those guys later to help pace their guys as long as possible. In cycling, you at all times, if possible, you want to be behind another rider to make the resistance that the wind gives you less, right? You don't want to be out in the open on your own until you absolutely have to be. And that's why you watch races a lot of times and you see these giant groups of bikes just riding together. It's all strategy because you don't want to be alone any longer than you have to. So what these teams do is they'll send riders up the road, making the teams behind that haven't been able to send a rider up the road have to work to catch up to those riders. And it's a grueling task to sit there and try to catch up to people that could be 2, 3, 4 minutes ahead because they let them get that far ahead. But the teams that have riders up there aren't going to do any of the work to help with that. And realistically, in a race like this, people like Alpecin, UAE, Team Visma Lease Bike, they don't want to see other riders go up the road because they know they're the ones that are going to have to work to get their favorite back up to the front. And they're going to demolish their team working to get back up there, leading that peloton to catch up. So the other 16 teams are going to be the ones that are sending riders up there attacking in order to try and break up those teams to give themselves a chance because it's realistically their only chance if they're going to sit with the favorites in the field.
So who are the favorites going into this? Are there specific teams or are there specific riders that you're sort of keeping your eye on?
So for me, there are a lot of riders that some would consider favorites, but there's only two real favorites, and that's going to be Mathieu van der Poel and Tadej Pogacar. Again, when it comes to this race specifically, because anything can happen and it can just come down to luck, I do have other riders that are in top form right now that also have a chance. We have a past winner in Wout van Aert. Mads Pedersen is always a favorite because he's one of the strongest riders in the field, and same with Filippo Ganna. So those five, in my opinion, are the top five that have a chance, but the real two that everybody's looking at to win are Mathieu van der Poel and Tadej Pogacar. The difference between Mathieu van der Poel and Tadej Pogacar, and this is why it's so important, this race, and the fact that Tadej Pogacar is riding this race is crazy because if he was to win, he would be the first rider that has won a Tour de France to win since 1981. Bernard Hinault. Most riders that win the Tour de France don't even race this race. They call it a death sentence. It's just to go beat yourself up. What we're watching right now in cycling is, in my opinion, and I'm wearing his shirt right now, it's actually him with a goat on the cobblestones. I just ordered this the other day before the race. Is the greatest bike rider of all time. And even Lance Armstrong, who some would consider beyond all the stuff that's happened with him, has said that he's the greatest bike rider of all time. So if he was to win this race and secure this monument, which he is not the favorite to do because he's a smaller, less weighted guy that's better at climbing than he is riding a race like this, it would be one of the greatest victories in the history of the sport.
So it's safe to say he is your GOAT.
He is my GOAT. It's not even close. He's 26 years old and he wins everything and he never stops winning. Like he's special.
Beyond like the top contenders, do you have like a dark horse that you're sort of looking at or any potential breakout riders?
Yeah, so I actually created the tier list. So the first five I gave you were my tier ones and tier twos. I actually have some other riders that I think have a chance to be successful in this race, and it all depends on tactics. My first couple guys are Stefan Kung, Jasper Stuyven, Jonathan Milan, Matej Mohoric, Biniam Girmay. These are all riders that are really good in classics like this. They're not as good as the top guys, but again, if any of those guys have flat tires, they stay within a group, they make it to the end, they have a chance to win. And the same with my tier fours, so Jasper Philipsen, Tim Merlier, Jordi Meeus, Niels Pollitt, like the first three specifically are just known as sprinters. And if they make it to the end of this race, they are the three fastest sprinters in the world right now. They will outsprint anybody else in front of them to win this race. So I don't necessarily see them being there at the end because the riders in front of them are stronger, but you never know how the race is going to go. So they would be my dark horses at the end of the day.
You mentioned there are like different team dynamics, how does that sort of work in cycling? You mentioned, you get behind certain riders and, that'll help with like wind resistance if you're just tailing another rider. Are there any other additional tactics?
Yes. So with the 7 guys you have on the team, although you're only going for one, there are times that, your one rider, again, if he has that flat tire or anything was to happen to him, you have to immediately shift. It's not really a choice. And that's where I see these dark horses I was talking about, the Jasper Philipsens, the Tim Merliers, the Jordy Mayus, like if they can stay as close as they can to the front, if they make it to the end into the Paris-Roubaix velodrome, they're the fastest bike riders in the world. They are going to beat people in a sprint and they have a chance to win. And it's really up to the top guys like Mathieu van der Poel, Tadej Pogacar, Wout van Aert to drop these guys and show them, hey, you're not beating us today. That is a part of their strategy, and that's what they're going to work with their team to do, to put the team on the front of the peloton and absolutely make those guys suffer so they're not in a group come 10, 15 kilometers to go.
You mentioned a little bit up at the top about the Arenberg forest. How does the race sort of change once these riders get to this point in the race?
Yep, so this is the first 5-star cobblestone sector that we're going to see in the race. And this is by far the most grueling and long sector that is in the race. Teams are going to want to have dropped as many people as possible from the peloton. So if there's 171 riders in the peloton, they are hoping to be down to a group of anywhere between 30 and 35, I would say. That's easier said than done. But realistically, this is the difference. If you were to have a problem on the Arenberg, flat tire, if you were to fall, your race is probably over, because this is where race teams want to completely obliterate anybody that doesn't feel like they have the legs that day. And there's going to be plenty of people that are going to lose it right there. This is where you're going to see Mathieu van der Poel, Tadej Pogacar, Wout van Aert, Mads Pedersen, Filippo Ganna keep themselves as close to the front as possible to all stick together and watch everybody else from behind fall back. This is also the cobblestone sector where you're going to see cobblestones literally inches out of the ground that they're riding bikes over, where they're going to shake the hardest, where it's going to be the most painful, and they still have 100 kilometers to go once it's done. So this is when you know you're in the thick of it. This could also be, if there's any bad weather the day before or the day of, it's going to be muddy, it's going to be slick, it's going to be really dangerous, and arguably the most dangerous sector of cobblestones in the world.
You mentioned that you had different tiers of riders that you're sort of keeping your eye on. If you were a betting man, what three bets would you place going into this race?
So I'm not sure how, the betting would work specifically, because if it was up to me, the two favorites are plus 225 and plus 300. I would just bet on both of them, because if one of the two wins, you are going to win money. Maybe not as much as if you just pick one and they win, but like I'm just thinking smart. But if I was going to take a dark horse, and again, this guy has been the fastest sprinter in the world all season so far, I'm taking Tim Merlier at plus 5,000 odds, because although I don't see him being there at the end, if anything was to happen, depending on weather, and if he's able to stay with the front group, again, he's been the fastest sprinter in the world. He's going to be faster than everybody else going into the velodrome, riding the track on the last lap and a half finish. I would take a chance on the plus 5,000 odds.
It's a nice little chunk of change right there. Might as well
Absolutely.
sprinkle $10 if you have it on it.
Exactly. You really can't go wrong.
I appreciate you, pulling back the curtains on this sport that I know I don't have much, knowledge about, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners don't have, as much knowledge either. So I appreciate you hopping on and talking about this. Um, I want to turn a little bit, and I want to see historically, do you have like a favorite moment that you've experienced watching this? Because it seems like, at the very beginning you said that you've been watching since you were a kid. Do you have a favorite memory from Paris-Roubaix?
I actually have a favorite moment, and it came in 2016. And I think it's because, for me, I really started liking cycling during the Lance Armstrong era. And then, you know, realistically, you could only really watch the Tour de France up until like 2014. So I loved the Tour de France. I loved watching all the guys. My favorite cyclist of all time is Cadel Evans, and I got to watch him win. So that was very cool. Um, but you don't actually get to see as often, in some of these bigger races, people that you would have never seen winning win. And in 2016, we got to see that. Matthew Heyman, who nobody before the race was talking about winning. Funny enough, he had actually just broken his arm weeks earlier, so this was one of his first races back from, and still being in pain. And he wasn't the team's favorite. He just happened to be in the breakaway that day, up towards the front. And he was in the front with 15 kilometers to go with some of the best riders in the world at that time. Thinking about Tom Bonin, Kevin Vermarka was up there. Uh, I just don't think you could have paid anybody to think of all the people going into the velodrome at that time. He was going to be the one that won. He wasn't on one of the big teams. He wasn't a favorite. He was not even thought about. And he out sprinted arguably the best sprinter of all time in Tom Bonin to win Paris-Roubaix. I was in shock. I think everybody was in shock. There's a cool video on YouTube I would recommend anybody go watch to look up the 2016 Paris-Roubaix. It's just so cool to see somebody that nobody thought had a chance to win something in such a fashion that nobody else in cycling could really do. And he did it at 37 years old.
I'll get that link from you after we hop off this interview, and I'll link it into the description. So if any of the viewers want to go check it out, it'll be there. And to do that with a broken arm, nonetheless, man, like I can't imagine going across that cobblestone and it just sitting there vibrating your arms like that. That certainly doesn't feel good. I'm sure of it.
Yeah, it's basically impossible. I mean, the fact that he even got on the bike 2 weeks before that race and won and like came back from that broken arm is unreal.
Well, brother, I appreciate you taking the time out of your Friday to hop on and, talk about this, explain a few things to me. I hope, the listeners learned something new. I surely did. But naturally, before we hop off, I need you to give me a bold take. What is the hottest take that you have for this year's Paris-Roubaix?
So first thing first, if anybody wants to watch, it will be on Peacock, so it's totally accessible to watch. It starts, I think, at 6:55 a.m. on Sunday morning, so you can get it in before the Masters. It's going to be an electric race. I definitely would recommend this one to anybody that's never watched one before. My bold take, which some would probably say it's not that bold, but the style of race that it is not suiting Tadej Pogačar, I'm going to say that he wins this race by 30 seconds over Mathieu van der Poel. And Mathieu van der Poel is such the favorite that, like, if he doesn't win, it's a disappointment for him. Finishing second is not good enough for him in this race. That's what everybody expects. And Tadej Pogačar is the best bike rider in the world. Again, he would be the first Tour de France winner to win the race since 1981 and might be the last rider that wins the Tour de France to race this race for who knows how long. So Tadej Pogačar wins by 30 seconds. I cry in this shirt, and it's going to be the best Sunday I could have asked for, with Master Sunday being right after.
Very bad pun coming up, but it seems like this cycling race is gearing up to be historical.
It absolutely is. Your pun is spot on, and I hope everybody gets a chance to see it because I could not be more excited.
Well, once again, appreciate you hopping on, brother. I'll certainly be tuning in. It's going to be pretty hard for me getting up at 6:30 and preparing for the race, but it seems like this is a can't miss event. Appreciate you hopping on and talking. If you guys like this, throw me a like, give us a subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Peace.